we got to put a bow on the NBA draft and everything that happened summer free agency. Who better to do this than our friend Chad Ford, calling from the streets of Hawaii? What's happening?
Never heard of streets of Hawaii before. It's good. The beaches of Hawaii.
Beaches of Hawaii. Okay. Well, we never talked after the draft. We usually do a podcast right afterwards, but I was traveling and then you had to go back and it just never happened. So, just a couple follow-up things on what happened that day. One, why did Nerlens Noel slip to number 6? It's been a week and a half. This is usually when stuff starts trickling out and the real information comes out. What I have heard, and I'm not saying this is true or not true, this is just what I'm hearing, is that teams were scared off by his recovery of that knee surgery. They didn't like how the surgery was performed. And I haven't heard anybody go on the record and say that yet. But do you think that's a plausible explanation for why somebody who everybody considered was the best talent in this draft falls to 6?
I think it's plausible. I think it's the most obvious answer. And look, I heard this from anonymous GMs before the draft. You know, the thing that I think was hard to understand was that when you talk to Dr. Andrews, who is perhaps the most respected orthopedic surgeon out there,
yep,
his take couldn't be more different about Noel, how Noel compared to past patients, past athletes that he had done. He was on the record about the surgery and how well it was going and how far ahead of schedule he was. And, you know, here's a guy with a lot to lose from a reputation standpoint if this kid's not recovering well. He sent letters to teams. He made himself available. He told me that there was literally no feedback from team doctors and teams with people having concerns, about this. And so, I don't know. Certainly heard that, especially even before the draft, Bill, with some of the general managers. Had heard from Cleveland, though, on the flip side, that it was not a concern, that their doctors had green-lit him, that he was okay for them to draft, and that was not the issue, and that, in fact, at the end of the day, for Cleveland, it was down to Anthony Bennett versus Nerlens Noel for the number 1 pick. Those were the two guys the last week of the draft that they were debating between. My theory, after calling the number of teams that did pass on Noel, was this concern that the guy that you draft with a top 2-3 pick might not really be able to contribute for an entire year. And with these young general managers, in many cases, doing the drafting, and then you've got Washington stuck there in the middle who wanted to make the playoffs this year.
Yep.
There was a concern that they wouldn't have anything to show for their draft pick this year, and that could negatively impact how they were perceived by ownership or fans or what have you. You know that it's not like most GMs to go out on a limb in the NBA. That's really not how teams play it. And I think more than anything else, that's what happened. You had risk-averse general managers who had someone else on their board that was much less risky, and therefore they opted over Noel. I really don't think, in talking to people, that this was a concern that long-term Noel was going to have an issue. I think it was short-term, and not just the knee, but also developmentally. He was the rawest of the 6 top guys in this draft.
And if you go case by case, right, like Cleveland wants to be good next year. They've been pretty open about that. So I get it. I could see them going in another direction. I thought they should have taken Victor Oladipo, but whatever. Orlando takes Oladipo at number 2. You and I both thought he was the safest bet in the whole draft. Hard to argue against that pick. Washington at number 3. really wanted a small forward. They had the local kid Porter, who had been rumored the whole time they're going to take. I think Bennett was another option there, but he was off the table already. There's another team that wants to be good right away. They're trying to keep John Wall. They're trying to build something, maybe even sneak into an 8 seed, get a little momentum. They have some cap space next season. So it makes sense to me why they wouldn't take him. Now, Charlotte at 4, that's the first team that doesn't totally make sense because, you know, not only you take Noel, and as you and I discussed the last time we were on the podcast, you're hurting yourself for the first season you have him because he can't even come back until January. That's something that with this crazy draft coming up, that's the best draft in 7 years or 11 years, depending on who you talk to. That's actually a good thing that, you know, you're making your team worse short term and trying to get a better pick in that draft. Now they went the other way. They took Cody Zeller, who's going to be ready to play minutes. They signed Al Jefferson. So they're clearly trying, you know, not to be in that tank group. And then Phoenix, number 5, was another one where it just seemed like they liked Len more than Noel. And I'm sure you talk to people who just like Len as a prospect more than him. So I get it. I get everything. New Orleans passing on him at number 6, I thought was shocking. And, you know, I know they had a chance to trade for Drew Holiday. He's an established point guard. He's somewhere between like the 9th and the 12th best point guard in the league. But they gave up a lot for him. I mean, they gave up potentially the best player in this draft and a top 3 protected pick next year. What did you think of that trade?
Well, you were calling it on draft night on the air that I was going to give Philly an A. You were warning me against it, but man, I thought that was first of all for Philly. What a terrific trade. If you're going to rebuild, you want to narrow the timeline down. And what I saw Philadelphia do was narrow that timeline down to about 1 calendar year. They wipe out their books. They bring in Michael Carter-Williams, who could be potentially the best point guard in this draft, certainly the point guard with the most upside, and Nerlens Noel. They're going to be horrible this year.
Yep.
Then they will have a top 5 pick in 2014, which is their own. And they get a 2014 pick from New Orleans, which won't be top 5. In fact, I think it's top 5 or top 6 protected, but probably is a late lottery pick.
Hold on, I got to interrupt you. I got to interrupt you for 1 second. New Orleans looks better on paper. That's a team I'd kind of want their lottery pick because look at the guys they're building around. Anthony Davis battled a couple injuries last year. He's a little undersized. Yeah. He's somebody that's not going to be the guy that he's going to be 5 years from now right now. Eric Gordon's been hurt every year for the last couple. They have this weird Drew Holiday, Tyreek Evans, and Eric Gordon, but Austin Rivers is involved. You basically have 4 guards. I guess they're going to bury Austin Rivers, but I don't really like the moves they made. And that's a team that's a deep Western Conference. I kind of like having that pick. And then, as you said, you get Noel, who can't come back for half the season anyway. You're just bottoming out. So Philly actually made their own pick worse by getting rid of Drew Holiday, which is another part of this trade, basically, right? Like you're also worsening your team for 1 year.
Exactly, and that's what they're doing. So next summer, when the draft is over, we're going to be looking at a Philadelphia team that has 4 young blue chip prospects on their roster. 4. And they added in basically a calendar year. You know, plus they have still a few pieces that they have left themselves. I don't know what they'll do with Evan Turner or whether Evan Turner will ever turn into anything or Thaddeus Young or what have you. That team we could be talking about that team next year as the young up and coming team in the NBA. And normally a rebuilding process takes a lot longer than just 1 calendar year. Ask any of the teams out there that are trying to do it. So Stan Hinkie, really with that one trade, almost guaranteed I'm going to be able to walk to the podium next summer right after we do our draft intros, and everyone's going to be excited about my team. And I'm going to have a ton of cap space if I want to go start to add the right sort of veterans around this team right away.
Yeah, they're going to have they're going to be at like 30 million. Well, actually, I'm looking at this hoops hype thing that still has Drew Holiday's contract in there. They're going to be at like around, I guess, 25 million maybe next summer. And as you said, they have 3 potentially 2 top 7 lottery picks. Nerlens Noel. I'm not as high on Michael Carter-Williams as you. I I don't know if he's going to make it, but at the very least, he was the 11th best player in an 11-player draft. So that is the makings of something. And Philly has not lured a ton of free agents, but I like Henke. I thought that was a ballsy trade. And what's funny is when we were at the draft, there was some misinformation about it initially. I thought they traded next year's number one with Jrue Holiday for Nerlens Noel. And I didn't recoil in horror when I heard that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And they was like, oh, no, they got the number one pick. I was like, what? I couldn't believe they got all that for Jrue Holiday. I like Jrue Holiday, but, he's a fringe all-star. I know he's young. He's 23, but I don't think he'll ever be one of the best 5 or 6 point guards in the league. I thought that was a great haul for him.
I thought it was too. And I was a little bit surprised that New Orleans did what they did. But I think one of the lessons that we're learning right now is not every owner is okay with the teams tanking. And we're seeing that right now. Dell Demps was under a lot of pressure to make this team more competitive this year. His owner was not on board. You got a new owner, also the owner of the New Orleans Saints, older owner that doesn't have a lot of years left to sit around and wait around. He wants to start to see this team be successful right now. And so Dell Demps looks at Nerlens Noel, and my guess is if he keeps the pick, I'm not even sure he can take Noel. He may have to take McLemore or someone else, or Trey Burke or whoever, because he's under a mandate to win right now.
Yeah.
And so when you factor that in, and you have to understand that general managers do not get to make the plans themselves usually. Usually they have to get sign off from owners, and in large part they're doing conceptually what their owners want them to do. Dell Demps did the right thing. He got an established point guard who's young, who was an all-star last year, and now he's got his backcourt of the future. He's got his big man of the future in Anthony Davis. And I don't know that they're going to be able to crack into the Western Conference. I think that's probably very unlikely. Even if they were healthy, and you bring up a great point that certainly this is a roster that doesn't inspire you as far as guys that are going to stay healthy.
Right. It could go a lot of ways. I thought they made a massive mistake. We live in a world where Tyreke Evans got a 4-year, $44 million offer, and Paul Millsap got 2 years for $19 million. And if you talk to, I could call 30 of my NBA friends and just do a blind sample test. Who would you rather have on your team, Paul Millsap or Tyreke Evans? Everyone would say Paul Millsap. And on top of this, had they just given, I would have been fine with 4 years, 44 for Paul Millsap. Had they done that, I actually like that fit for them more than Tyreke Evans, who basically is going to be a 6 man. I don't think you can play him and Eric Gordon together. And I also think Tyreke Evans is the captain of the good stats on a bad team guy, all-stars, right? He's putting up his 23, but you're losing by 10 points. I hated what they did. I don't understand how Millsap was only 2 years, $19 million for Atlanta. How does nobody top that?
I was stunned on the Millsap deal as well. I think, though, it was most likely, from what I hear, a miscalculation by his agent, who came out of the gates asking for $15 million a year for Millsap. And then, as you know, the musical chairs go in the free agency, the chairs just start disappearing quickly. And I think before his agent understood what the market was for his player, most of those chairs were gone. And I just think it was a miscalculation on his part. Had he come in and asked for a multi-year deal at the $11, $12 million range, he probably gets a lot more money. But starting at $15 million, you and I would both agree that's too much for Paul Millsap on a multi-year deal. I think that Tyreke Evans, the interesting thing, and just talking to GMs, is no one knows how much the stink of Sacramento has tainted a player like Evans. In other words, had he been drafted by a good franchise, had he been drafted with a franchise that had culture, that had a coach that was developing their players and what have you, would Tyreke Evans have been a better player? He was the Rookie of the Year when he came into the league a couple of years ago. And I think, I'm not sure, because I also think he's been tainted by the stink of Sacramento, and I think he's done some of it on his own. I think that is what Adele Dents is banking on, is that Tyreke Evans' problems had as much to do with the horrific situation in Sacramento the last couple of years as it had to do with him as a player. We'll see. I'm not a huge Tyreke Evans fan, but going back to the whole New Orleans making the playoffs, and if you look at the West, there's only one team that made the playoffs last year that is unlikely to make the playoffs next year, and that's the Lakers.
Right.
That's it. All those other teams are, unless there's, horrific injuries, they're all making the playoffs. So there's one spot. Dallas looks like they're still going to try to be a playoff team. And Minnesota is gearing up to be a playoff team. And then there's New Orleans. Phoenix is going to be bad. Sacramento is going to be bad. Utah clearly now has shown that they're likely
they're going
to be bad. And Portland. Well, you left
out. I like Portland. I really like what Portland did. They had no bench last year. They had the worst bench in the league. And I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I think they got Thomas Robinson, who let's talk about him in a second. Thomas Robinson, Robin Lopez, CJ McCollum, and Darrell Wright. All of a sudden you have a bench, and they have LaMarcus Aldridge and Lillard and Batum and Wesley Matthews. I like that team. I would think that team is a much safer bet to make the playoffs than what New Orleans put together. And going back to Tyreke for a second, you mentioned all the reasons why I would think about trying to get him because of that Sacramento stink, because that was such a bad situation that I'd be trying to get everybody who was on that team. But on the other hand, I just don't think he's an $11 million a year player. I think he's, a sixth man who should be making 5-6 a year. Maybe he comes in a little like J.R. Smith on the Knicks, something like that. Instant offense. You take him out if he doesn't have it. You're paying him $11 million a year. You're saying that you think he can be one of the 3 best players on a championship team. And I don't see it. I mean, that is a massive, massive risk. I would much rather have had Paul Millsap with that money. But back to Thomas Robinson for a second. Can you believe this guy was the 5th pick in the draft? Everybody was comparing him to David West a year ago. Everybody liked him. Everybody thought he was a reliable prospect. And Houston, because of the Dwight Howard thing, they had to have a fire sale for him, basically. Portland got him for nothing. They gave up nothing. And I can't remember another situation like that where here's a guy who was in Sacramento in a terrible situation. He's like the 17th power forward they have, gets traded halfway through the season to Houston. Houston decides for the style they're trying to play, he doesn't make sense. They don't want to indoctrinate him in the offense with 20 games to go. So they bury him. And now he's available. Now he's got a chip on his shoulder. Why weren't teams trying to get him on DraftNet? I don't get it.
I think it's amazing the sort of herd mentality in the NBA. You love a guy. If you love a guy before the draft, then everybody loves him. By the way, not everybody loved Thomas Robinson coming up to the draft, but most people did. And he almost went number 2 to Charlotte. They were seriously considering him versus Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Thomas Robinson could have went as high as number 2 in that draft, which would have even been more amazing. Again, he comes into a dysfunctional franchise, as you pointed out, and not a great fit for a player like Thomas Robinson. That team was not a good fit for him. The Houston thing was a wash, and my guess is they don't give him up if they don't go get the Dwight Howard deal. I mean, if they weren't going to move that direction and try to clear cap space, they're not giving him up. I still think he can play. Now, here's the talk around the league is, well, Thomas Robinson, what they found out about Thomas Robinson was that he couldn't remember a play. And number 2, that he wanted to do more on the offensive end than he's really capable of doing. And we saw a little bit of this at Kansas, and Bill Self did a really nice job of reining him in. where he wants to handle the ball and shoot it a little bit, and thought he had more abilities than perhaps maybe that he had. But you're talking about a young player. You're talking about a player that the stat guys love, coming in, and a guy who for sure can rebound in the NBA. For sure, he has that ability to rebound.
And has a 17-footer. And it has a reliable 17-footer.
I think, again, there's a herd mentality in the league. They love you 1 minute, and then they're off you the next. And the same scouts that loved Thomas Robinson a year ago are now like rolling their eyes. Well, he can't play. I think this goes again, and we're trying to understand the draft and which players are great fit. And I agree with you. I love Portland's draft, by the way. I love McCollum at 10. Actually, you didn't mention Alan Crabb. I really like Alan Crabb. That's another lethal scorer coming off the bench who can shoot the basketball. Robin Lopez. You're probably right. Portland is right there in the mix with those teams trying to make the playoffs. I find it just so fascinating that so much of these guys, what's going to happen next, depended on what team they were drafted, what their fit is with the team, and who their head coach is.
I just thought, Brooklyn takes Mason Plumlee 22nd. If I'm Brooklyn, I'm trying to flip that pick for Thomas Robinson. We've learned over and over again in this league, repeatedly, at least 15 times over the last 20 years, that the easiest way to get a good player is to get like a top 5 or top 6 lottery pick with a pedigree who failed for whatever reason and who didn't fail for the right reason. I think like Johnny Flynn or Hasheem Thabit, those were guys that you watch them and you go, all right, those guys don't have it. Like, it's just, that's a wash. And I think even Wesley Johnson was a pretty decent example of that. It was like you watch him and you go, oh man, this is not the same guy we thought he was going to be. But you look at guys who have failed because of the situation, and now you're talking about Chauncey Billups. I'm trying to, there's a whole list of guys like this, but you know what I mean? It's even somebody like Antonio Daniels, who was a complete failure for the Grizzlies, but actually turned into a decent backup guard for the Spurs for a few years. Like, you have that pedigree. It's pretty hard for you to not be a 9-man rotation guy. And with this draft was so weak, you look at like Utah's taking Dieng from Louisville, who could be like 27 for all we know, and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Andre Roberson. Like, how is Thomas Robinson not better than those guys? I thought I was stunned by that. And the other thing I was really surprised by, and I think this had to do with just the depth of point guards in the draft, but Isaiah Cannon was one of my favorite late first rounders in the draft. Like, I just think he's going to be a rotation guy, and he's going to be an irrational confidence guard off the bench. I've seen his type of player succeed before, and he just started falling. And I think it happened because so many teams took point guards, and Houston's sitting there at 34, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, he's going to do it again, and then it happens. He gets him. Did you like Cannon?
Really liked Cannon. Thought that was probably the best second round pick of the night.
Totally agree.
For Houston. A guy also, by the way, who's going to be able to play right away. And I wouldn't be surprised at all in a year or two whether he supplanted if they keep Jeremy Lin as their point guard, that he supplanted Jeremy Lin as their starting point guard. I actually think he has a lot more upside than Lin does. His only question really with Cannon was that he's a bit of more of a tweener. He's more of a scorer than a true point guard. But it's hard to evaluate when you play at Murray State how much of that, again, is the team that he was on and the situation he was in. I mean, Damian Lillard looked fine running the point for Portland last year, and he wasn't much of a point guard at Weber State because of the situation that he was in. Steph Curry, the same situation. Given where the NBA has gone with point guards, it's nice to have the Steve Nashes of the world, but most of those guys aren't there. And these other types of point guards thrive there. I thought, Houston's the most fascinating team to me because you're looking at a team that a year ago, pre the Harden trade, didn't have a player on their roster that was, I don't know, top 100. I don't know, top. I guess Kevin Martin would have been, top 50.
Yeah, they were going to be a 25-win team. Darryl got mad at me because I picked them. Joe House and I did over-unders for the season before the Harden trade. And the over-under for them was like, I don't know, 32 or something. And I was like, way under. They're one of the 5 worst teams in the league. Like, he was stockpiling all these assets, but couldn't put them into one big trade, and it was really seemed like I was genuinely worried he was going to get fired. I just thought like he had this plan of like, I'm going to keep collecting assets and it's going to pay off. Just wait. And then by the summer of 2012, the plan just seemed, it was like the boy who cried wolf, right? And then James Harden just fell into his lap. That trade, it materialized in 3 days and boom, he had the assets. And for whatever reason, Oklahoma City liked Jeremy Lamb and boom, there it goes. There it happens and leads to Howard. And it's amazing. I mean, kudos to him. He could have panicked a bunch of times along the way there and didn't,
And kudos to Les Alexander.
Yeah.
Who didn't fire him and who stuck with the plan. Because what it reminds me of, ironically, and he came from this team, is exactly what Danny Ainge did with the Celtics. Yep. And you know this, how restless Celtics fans got as year after year, Ainge just kept collecting mediocre assets and, no star, and it looked like lottery hell forever. And then, the Garnett trade happens and the Ray Allen trade happens, and then all of a sudden they're contending.
Well, you need some luck too, because people forget the Celtics almost traded pretty much all the assets they had in that KG trade for Allen Iverson, which came very close. And I think the deal breaker part of it might have been Al Jefferson. I don't remember all the details, but it would have been multiple first round picks, and Al Iverson would have been to put a Band-Aid on a pretty gaping wound. He was near the end of his career too. He probably had 2 years left. And I think for Houston, it's interesting. That Pau Gasol trade that David Stern ended up vetoing is a really fun fork in the road now in NBA history, right? Because if Houston gets Pau Gasol, there's no way they can trade for James Harden down the road. The Clippers are not the Clippers. The Lakers now have Chris Paul. Dwight Howard probably stays there, I'm guessing, because they didn't have to give up Bynum in that Chris Paul trade. So they could have flipped Bynum for Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard now stays with the Clippers. And then Oklahoma City has nowhere to trade James Harden. So you have four awesome fork in the road moments for all these teams. And Houston was the only one that made it. I guess the Clippers too. Houston and the Clippers made out better. And the Lakers and Oklahoma City ended up making out a lot worse. And that's just how it went.
It is. Some of it's luck, but I think I think this proves again that if you collect assets and you're patient, at some point you're going to run across the team that, for luxury tax reasons or because they feel like the team's stagnated and they want to rebuild or whatever, those guys are going to be available, and you just have to wait for the right deal to come along. And I'm not
also,
saying that's the ideal way to rebuild, but it has been proven again and again that eventually you'll be able to collect all those assets and get something remarkable for what turned out to be a lot of mediocre stuff.
Right. And you need, as you said, you need a long-term plan. You need an organization that's on the same page from top to bottom, which is something the Celtics had with Wick and the owners and Danny Ainge. And then when they decided to really throw away that 2007 season, they had to get Doc on board because he had not had a good 3 years in Boston. A lot of people were calling for him to get fired, including myself, and they had to convince him, look, don't try to win every game. We won't fire you. You're going to come back next year. And they were on the same page. Houston, same thing. Daryl Morey and Les Alexander. If the owner is not on page with that asset collection plan, then he at some point has to panic and make a trade for some short-term guy that doesn't work out. And I think when you're looking at what's going on in Philly right now, one of the worst front offices, they have Doug Collins making personnel decisions. He had one of the worst summers last season anybody has had. I mean, just the catastrophe, like everything they gave up for Bynum, which I thought was a decent risk for them, and it just came up snake eyes. And then the Kwame Brown signing and Nick Young, and just couldn't have gone worse. Now they have Sam Hinkie, who, was a really well-respected up-and-coming executive that a lot of teams liked. They just hired Scott O'Neil as their CEO, and Scott O'Neil is somebody who a couple years ago was being thought of as a possible commissioner candidate, is, one of the most connected guys in the whole league. So now you have those two guys. You have Josh Harris. You have that guy, David Heller, that they got from Goldman Sachs. All of a sudden, that's a real organization. And that's the kind of organization that can execute the plan that we just talked about, where it's like, all right, we're going to suck this year. We're going to be horrible. Nerlens Noel might not come back till February. Michael Carter-Williams is probably going to stink as our point guard this year, but whatever. We're going to have 2 top 7 picks in one of the best drafts ever. And that's what you need. And I feel bad for a team like the Milwaukee Bucks GM, Zach Lowe and I were talking about it yesterday. I don't think he's done a very good job, but it's clear that the owner is telling him, like, I don't want to bottom out. I don't want to stink. I want to try to compete for the 8 seed. So what do? Then you're signing Zaza Pachulia, and you're signing OJ Mayo, and you're signing Carlos Delfino, and you're just putting together all these mediocre players, and you're going to go 41-41. Like, congratulations. That's not a plan.
You're exactly right on the Bucks. That's exactly what's happened. You've got Senator Cole, who's been consistently telling John Hammond, I want to make the playoffs. And more years than not, he's been able to work an 8 seed, or a 7th seed out of that.
Yeah.
But that's all you're going to be able to do. And it's really sad this year because Milwaukee actually could have gone really bad. And they would have had some decent young players around that could have played the Greek kid a lot more. I think John Henson's intriguing. I think Larry Sanders is intriguing as a player, and just gone horrible this year, and then really picked up a star in 2014. And, we're watching the 2013 under-19s, and we thought this draft was good, and a couple of guys start emerging out of the under-19 now, and all of a sudden it gets even a little bit better. Now I'm looking at maybe 7 potential All-Stars coming out of 2014.
So when you did your tiers, you didn't have anyone in tier 1 and you didn't have anyone in tier 2. So you're saying there could be 7 guys in tier 1 or tier 2 for next year's draft?
Yeah, 7, maybe 8.
Wow, 8? Oh my God!
No, that's assuming everybody comes out. But assuming that, wouldn't that be really ironic if Andrew Wiggins says, you know what, I'm going to return to Kansas for another year, or Andrew Wiggins, blows an ACL or something like that during the season.
Knock on wood.
After these teams, especially for me as a Kansas fan, that would be horrible. But this is for people that criticize this strategy. That and I really think this is going to be the story. We have to run some sort of thing on ESPN.com this year that in addition to like the power rankings, it's going to have to be like the Wiggins rankings or something like that, because this is going to be epic for a number of teams that have this strategy. It's not just Andrew Wiggins. Julius Randle is an elite prospect. Marcus Smart, I think, has that ability. Jabari Parker is a guy that tons of people are getting excited about. And I just watched Team USA under-19s, Aaron Gordon, who's going to Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
That guy's a mini Blake Griffin.
And you didn't mention the Kentucky twins, the point guard who's the twin, as everybody says, is he probably would have been the number 1 pick. Yeah. Andrew
Harrison, 6'5" point guard who's athletic and can do a little bit of everything. The kid out of Australia, Dante Exum, who lit up the under-19s, and I saw him at the Nike Hoop Summit. Long, athletic, 6'5", can play the 1 and the 2. There is a lot of talent coming next year.
And you didn't mention the Croatian kid who ended up bowing out of this year's draft. A year from now,
Dario Saric, probably a top 10 pick next year. Led the under-19s in scoring, rebounding, and maybe even assists. Led in all 3 of those categories. Also led in turnovers. which some people are quick to point out that if you're a 6'9" point guard who's really the only option for your team on offense, you probably will lead in turnovers as well.
And you're mentioning all those guys, and this hasn't even factored in yet the 2 or 3 guys who come out of nowhere next season in college, right? I mean, this happens every year.
We did not have Victor Oladipo as a lottery pick at the start of the season. We did not have Ben McLemore as a lottery pick at the start of the season. So there's 2 guys right there that we didn't have identified as a lottery pick before the college basketball season started. Oladipo, we thought, was probably a nice late first round, early second round defensive stopper in a Tony Allen mode, not the number 2 pick in the draft. And that happens every year.
Right. You could have like somebody, I'm looking at the top 100 on Max Preps right now for this year. Like somebody like Chris Walker. It's the number 6 guy on this list. He's going to Florida. What if he like emerges into this stud that, we don't totally expect it's going to happen? I mean, anybody on this list could make a jump.
Well, there's the big kid in Kansas, Joel Embiid, who blew up in the All-Star circuit for the high school, who's 7 foot 240 and really moves great for a 7-footer. I mean, just moves great. Doesn't really understand the game of basketball, but he's also going to Kansas, and Bill Self, who has a really good track record of developing big guys. Willie Cauley-Stein out of Kentucky, who was one of the rawest players on John Calipari's roster last year, hadn't played a lot of basketball, but you saw a ton of potential there. With him working hard all summer and coming back on that loaded team, we could all be going crazy over a guy who's 7 feet, 230, who can really move his feet. Montrezl Harrell, man, I can't even pronounce his name, out of Louisville, was another guy under 19. It's just a great motor, great athlete. There's a lot there.
And you think like even somebody like Alex Len, a year ago, would anybody have thought Alex Len was going to be the 5th pick in the draft?
No. Also, I think Alex Len was like 21 on our big board coming into the season.
Yeah, so when you talk about what's interesting is some of the teams that I'm not ready to call it tanking because the teams haven't tanked yet, but the teams that are obviously in blow it up and rebuild mode, I would say definitely Philadelphia. I would say Orlando because they haven't tried to add any free agents, and then also this Oladipo at point guard thing. Henry Abbott called this out. This seems like a way to make your team worse short term to also gain him some stuff. Phoenix is going to be terrible again. Sacramento on the fence. And then Utah obviously just gutted everything. They're all in on this 2014 draft now. Then you might have the Lakers.
Utah might be the second worst team in the West.
Yeah, they made a concerted effort to be terrible with that B. Adrian Richard Jefferson trade. Really, it was like they went all in on this draft. And then I think the Celtics and the Lakers are the other 2 teams that the Celtics, I'm not as convinced as everybody else that they're going to be willing to throw the season away. I think it'll depend on how it starts. If they're 8-25 when Rondo comes back, I think it'll be pretty clear what to do. And then the Lakers, I was on Coward's podcast talking about this, Coward's radio show today talking about this. If the Lakers were smart, they would just stink this season. They would make a concerted effort to be terrible and wait for Kobe to come back as long as possible and trade Gasol and go that direction. I'm not sure if the owners has the balls to do that, but that's the smart move, is just to bottom out for a year.
Kobe's going to want to come back to and prove that the Lakers are better off without Dwight Howard now. He's going to have a chip on his shoulder as well. I think that's the underreported part of this. Now, I'm not sure that Kobe can keep doing it. I mean, we'll learn, whether Kobe can carry the type of load that he needs to carry.
But he can't. You can't come back from that injury early. Nobody comes back from that injury early unless it's Terrell Suggs and you're loaded with deer antler spray.
Right. I mean, I don't know what point it is, but for them to be as bad as Utah, I think probably Phoenix is the worst team in the West, and then Utah and Sacramento will slug it out for second worst, and then from there, the one thing about Utah that's just a little bit hard to gauge is they actually have a lot of young talent on that team. And if Cantor plays like he did towards the end of last season, if Favors gets it, Gordon Hayward takes the next step, if Trey Burke is as good as, people think they are, and Utah fans have been begging to see Alec Burks more in limited minutes.
Me too. I'm not a Utah fan, and I'm begging for it.
He's looked good. They might surprise a lot of people. They might be better than you think. It's just the West is so stacked. And then I think you're right. Orlando will be bad. Philly will probably be the worst team in the East next year. Boston, I think Atlanta. I haven't seen anything. I mean, maybe if Atlanta lands Andrew Bynum or Monta Ellis, I'm not really sure that they'll end up doing any of that stuff, though.
The guy that nobody's signed yet, who's kind of lurking and looming and is just shadow, is now hanging over free agency because there's really not a lot of big guns left. Pekovic on Minnesota, who Zach and I were talking about this yesterday. It just seems like teams are going to assume that Minnesota is going to match whatever. Well, make a match. Don't let him get him at a discount. Like he's clearly an 8-figure a year guy. So if I'm Atlanta, I'm offering him $50 million for 4 years, trying to get him. If they match it, they match it. Now I've weakened a competitor, and that's a team that if they have to pay Kevin Love the max and Ricky Rubio the max and Pekovic $12 million a year and they're in a small market, like that's pretty dangerous. So maybe you do that with an eye on trying to make a run of Kevin Love in a year or something. I don't know why teams just cede that competitive advantage of trying to screw over a team with a contract. But from what Atlanta's done, like they have Horford, they have Millsap. It really seems like this Jeff Teague, Brandon Jennings trade might have some legs. I like Dennis Schroder. I think he's going to be good right away. You like how I pronounce that?
Yeah.
And they brought Korver back. Like, I don't think that's going to be that bad of a team. So I don't know. Tankapalooza is going to be, I think we're not going to know until January who the entrants are. And then it's just going to be full-fledged tanking. It's going to be great. Like the Celtics Rondo might be the first person who sits out a year and a half with a partially torn ACL. They might just like chain him to something so he doesn't come back. Just like chain him in the basement. You're not coming back, Rondo. I agree with that. I think Philly is. Would you put Philly in the lead?
I put Philly in the lead. I think Philly and Phoenix are the two teams that, to me, look like they have almost no hope of being good, no matter what they do at this point. And Orlando probably next in there. I mean, it is interesting. Look, Washington's probably a playoff team next year. Detroit's trying to make that move into the playoff. Cleveland's trying to make the move, and if they get Bynum and he's healthy, they make a move there. Charlotte added Al Jefferson. I'm not sure how much that moves the needle for them. I know they desperately needed some low post scoring. And, it's interesting though. Utah gives up Al Jefferson because, one, with all the talent that Utah had, Al Jefferson couldn't get them a playoff win.
They couldn't get him a playoff win, yeah.
Yeah, couldn't get him a playoff win. And two, he's such a black hole that, everybody, once he touches the ball, all their young talent standing around. He's not going to pass the ball. He's not going to make other people better around him. He's not the veteran that you really want on a development, a team that's trying to develop their young talent. And that's why they were so quick to let him go. I'm not sure that But
on Charlotte, they need somebody to take 20 shots. I'm in the minority on Big Al. I actually think he needs to be double teamed at all times. And if you're a team that's challenged offensively, it's not a bad thing to have him. So, you're right though. Charlotte should be included.
How much does it move the needle? They were 21-win team. Maybe he gives them 5-6 wins more.
Well, look at why they took Cody Zeller over McLemore and Noel. The smart move would have been to take Noel, and he would have made them worse and given them a better chance at getting Wiggins or whoever. But, they clearly they've been drafting all these successful college players trying to build whatever the hell they're trying to build. Yet he fires a coach year after year after year. I don't know what Michael Jordan's doing, what his plan is. But, the other thing when we're talking about how next year's going to look, there's always that one random team that you don't know is going to be terrible until it happens. And yeah, I think a really good example is in '97, the Spurs. They'd won like 56 games the year before. Nobody expected them to be terrible, and they just kind of stumbled into it because Robinson got hurt, some other guys got hurt, and then all of a sudden, they're sitting there with the number one pick. And I think when you look at like 2003, right? Denver was a team that had been spending a lot of time, and they'd had some lottery picks and and then I think they won 17 games that year. I think Rafe LaFrentz might have gotten hurt, like a whole bunch of stuff happened. So, a team it could be like New Orleans, like Eric Gordon could get hurt, Anthony Davis could get hurt, all of a sudden they're in the top 5 and Philly's getting their pick. So you just never know. I think you're going to earn your money though this year. I mean, this will be your best year since 2007 with all the stuff going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, in a lot of ways, I thought this year was a lot harder year for me because trying to identify talent when there isn't a lot of talent is harder. This year, it might be trying to differentiate the top talent. I think the hardest thing about covering the draft this year will be that I think Andrew Wiggins is going to disappoint some people.
No.
At first at Kansas.
Really?
The hype is so high on him. And he's on a team with Bill Self where he's going to be asked to fit in and play a role. Bill Self's just not going to feature him, and give him, 25 shots a game. And he's really not that type of player. I think Wiggins is an extraordinary talent. But, Wayne Selden, who's one of their 3 elite freshmen that are coming in, he's much more of a gunner than Andrew Wiggins is, in my mind. And I think what you'll see with Wiggins is lots of flashes of absolute, can you believe that guy did that? Some big games for Wiggins and some games out of him. But, we're being, and look, part of it's me, we're being led to think, Wiggins is the best prospect since LeBron, so I want to see LeBron out there every night. And I'm just not sure that he's that sort of guy on that sort of team. I think Kentucky's a team that is more likely to play the sort of way that the pros play, and Calipari's whole thing is to try to make these guys into high lottery picks, and that's part of his recruiting shtick, and it's a big part of who he is. He wants to win too, but that's going to be a big part of it. I think there'll be people asking me all year, why isn't Julius Randle the number 1 pick? Because of the teams and systems and players. I think Wiggins is the best prospect. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, I think, look, everybody hit me with Anthony Davis all 2011 and 12. This guy is skinny. What does this guy do? He starts at Kentucky and doesn't have big games at first. How in the world is this guy the number 1 pick? Just relentless all year. And then at the end of the season, no one was messing with it anymore because he won a championship and went on that great run at the end with Kentucky. But for most of the year, that's what I was inundated with the whole year is how in the world is Anthony Davis the number 1 pick in this draft?
I have a couple points. One is I think Julius Randle has a real chance to ascend so that there's a little Odin versus Durant type debate because think about it. He's 6'9", 225, playing for Kentucky. Like the pure old school power forward doesn't exist that much in the NBA anymore. Like the guys that we grew up with, the Karl Malone type power forwards, there's just not a lot of them anymore. And that's a guy like, all right, I get what he does. He's 6'9", phenomenal athlete.
Inside, outside.
Yeah, I think if Wiggins struggles at all for any reason, that's going to be a debate. You mentioned how people are saying that Wiggins is the best prospect with LeBron. I actually disagree with that. And obviously I've just seen him on YouTube and things like that. But I think people forget now that 7 years has passed or 6 years, the Durant-Odin draft and just what kind of prospects Durant and Odin were, and just watching those guys that year, and even like Odin in the championship game, what a phenomenal force of nature he was in that game, and just what it was like to watch Durant that whole season playing center, creating his own shot, like playing for a bad coach and just figuring out night after night how to get to 25 points and 12 rebounds and everything he did for that team. I thought both of those guys were fantastic that year. And I know Wiggins and Randall and these guys are really highly regarded, but it would be hard for me to believe they would be better than Durant and Oden were on their best days that freshman year in college.
Well, look, Oden came in with the same hype that LeBron did. Yeah. And people forget that now because he's a bust. And every time that I mention, this is the most hyped class since Oden came in, people forget how hyped Oden was.
And Al Horford and a whole bunch of those other guys, Joakim Noah, like that class was loaded.
Yeah, Florida guys they were returning that year. After winning a championship, they decided not to go high in the draft that year. Noah might have been the number one pick in the draft had he went into the draft the year before. You're right. I mean, that was a really good draft. I think the thing that's going to compel a lot of this story is that Kentucky is going to have another super team. We have 7 Kentucky players in our top 30. 7. That's never happened before. We have 2 guys on the bench that we're saying are going to be first round picks next year in a loaded draft. They're going to be good. Duke is shaping up to be. I mean, this is the other thing too. Is Duke's shaping up to be a really good team. Kansas has 3 blue chip freshmen coming in, which is really unusual. For a team like Kansas, you're going to have a lot of the marquee teams in college basketball that are going to be loaded. Arizona is loaded with McDonald's All-Americans now as well. And Aaron Gordon might be next to Andrew Wiggins, the most highlight worthy. We're going to see him on SportsCenter every night that he plays. Go YouTube the dunk that he had in the finals when the under-19 won the gold medal championship. The alley-oop dunk that he had, it's unreal, spectacular. How high he gets and how how he can finish, and he's got that Blake Griffin motor. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting college basketball season. I think that's going to lead to that. I think the fact that you have all these teams tanking, I think next year is going to be one of those rare years, and this is what reminds me of 2003. Everyone in the NBA, even if you weren't a college basketball fan, was conscious that there was this race for the NBA title, but there was also this race for LeBron.
Yeah, it happened in 03 and 07 was the other time it happened. Those were the last 2.
And you knew it. You knew it coming in. You knew what these teams were doing, and there was this consciousness going on. And now everyone understands that storyline now, and we're going to all be following it again. And I think it'll be as intriguing to see what these teams that are being bad, what they're trying to do, and how they come up with clever ways to lose, and especially towards the end of the season, if they're all sort of clumped together, what's going to start happening. And that makes for exciting NBA because even the bad teams are interesting now.
And also, in 07, which I love that season for college hoops. I just thought it was great. And, we just don't see it anymore where there are guys. Everybody is so unpolished now in college, and I remember watching last year was an aberration with how bad it was. It just on a top shelf talent level. But watching Noel and knowing he's the number 1 pick, and he was so raw, and I liked him. I remember watching one game and House and I were texting and wow, this guy has a chance. And then at the same time we're saying, but man, it's too bad he can't stay in college for another year. Right. And in 2007, you didn't feel that way about Durant. You didn't feel that way about Oden when he really got going. The Florida guys clearly needed to come out. There was real star power that year, and it was great to watch. And what I'm hoping with this year is all you need is 8 or 9 really good freshmen to make it an awesome season. Guys that are just polished, awesome freshmen. And the guy that keeps getting overlooked is Parker, who, as Scoop Jackson pointed out, won the Illinois title all 4 years, right? Or the Chicago title? He won something. He won freshman. He's the only Chicago player ever to win the title all 4 years. And he's like, what more did this guy have to do? He's playing one of the toughest places to play in the country, and he won the title every year.
It's interesting. If Wiggins is the LeBron of this draft, then he's the Carmelo Anthony. I mean, he's the guy who is probably as a freshman the most polished scorer, the guy who can do everything, probably the most well-rounded player, high basketball IQ, and the difference between him and Carmelo is much higher character with Parker. As far as just work ethic, person, all of those different things. He's a dream of a kid to coach, as a person as well. I mean, it'll be interesting. If he was more athletic, he would be the number one pick in the draft because he's more skilled. He's a better basketball player than Andrew Wiggins is.
Right.
Andrew Wiggins has that rare top 1% athletic ability in the entire NBA type of guy, where Wiggins is going to be, more of a guy like a Carmelo. I mean, he's not going to jump out of the gym every time. He can dunk and he can run. He's not a bad athlete, but he's just not an explosive one.
You mean Parker?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Parker.
Yeah.
He's going to be really good. And, Duke has a chance to be pretty good next year. They got Rodney Hood, who was a transfer from Mississippi State, who's also a pretty fantastic basketball player as well, coming in. It's going to be a really interesting year. I mean, we keep going through this, and, Marcus Smart, Oklahoma State, is going to be pretty good next year. They're bringing back all their guys.
And Marcus Smart was a guy that you're rooting for him to come back for one more year, especially as a point guard. Like, oh, yeah, just come back one more year. Really refine your game and kind of own who you are as a player instead of being like everybody else, every other point guard who comes into the NBA a year too early. I think my fear with Parker is that he's not going to come out after his freshman year. I think he's out of all these guys, he's the guy that I could see staying for at least 2. And if anything, it would be the rare case where it might actually be a smart business move, because he'd go from being like the 5th pick or the 4th pick maybe this year to the clear number 1 pick a year from now. I would say, just gut feeling, I'd be more surprised if he left than if he stayed, but we will see. Chad Ford, we got to go. This is great. I'm sure we're going to talk about this draft 1,000 more times. I'm going to watch a ton of college hoops this year. I can't wait. I'll be watching your team. I'll be watching Duke. Arizona's going to be fun again. This is going to be great. And I guess, when are you writing again this summer? Or are you taking the summer off?
Taking a little time off, but we're going to have a big board coming, I think, next week, our first big board of 2014. And then we'll start ramping it up with explaining what some of these guys have done this summer at LeBron Camp and the international tournaments or whatever. There's some guys already shining there as well. So, can you update the big board like every 3 hours for the next year? Just continue. I guess it'll be a pretty regular feature this year.
I want to see it like the stock market, where I could just check every day and see whose stock is up and who's down. I can't wait. Chad Ford, thanks for the time. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.